AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Hello and welcome to another cybersecurity episode of the AI in Action podcast. I am your host, John Petherbridge. In this episode, I'm speaking with Wim Remes. Wim walks us through his journey into cybersecurity to chairman of the board at IC2 and now a virtual Vciso where he services businesses around the world. Wim is both technical and business orientated, which gives him a unique perspective on the role of a virtual Vciso.
So my name is Wim Remes. I own and run Wire Security out of Belgium. And how I got into cybersecurity is I think like most of the people my age that ended up in cybersecurity, I was a system engineer back in 1999, and some of my clients had security infrastructure, firewalls, network infrastructure that was not properly configured. So I started looking at it, started delving into different security topics, and ultimately became the person responsible for security, and that ended up being my career. That's the quick way of how I got into cybersecurity.
Okay. So you're the guy that kind of stepped up and kind of took accountability for the security issues that you saw at an early stage.
Yes, that's correct. And then in the beginning, that was mostly configuring firewalls, managing networks, looking at the operating systems. But then quickly, I evolved my career, going from the more technical side to the more process organizational sides. So worked for Ernst & Young for a while, doing managing consulting, then also develop vulnerability management programs, security policies, but then also kind of missed the technical part and went back to several organizations where I was more focused on penetration testing, offensive security. And then in the end, I decided to marry both the technical and the organizational sides. I think being that what they call a boundary spanner between those two areas within an organization is an important role and a role I get a lot of satisfaction out of.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because a lot of people, when they move away from the technical, they tend to not go back. So that's the fact that you went into the kind of the policies and the standards, and then you went back to doing some pen testing to kind of sharpen your skills there. You found that you're just as much interested in both sides of security, both the kind of the governance and the technical side.
I remember when I was I think 23, 24, which is ages ago. There was a manager I was talking to, and he told me that at some point I would have to choose, either go into the management side or stay technical. And I think at that point I vowed that I never wanted to make that choice. I just as much like doing the deep, in-depth technical work as the high-level strategic work. So I always try to keep my foot on both sides. And until now, we're more than 20 years later. That has perfectly worked out for me.
Yeah, well, fair play. I think having that breadth of experience as well, I think that really led you quite nicely into your spell with ISC2. Tell me a bit about that.
So IC2 was definitely a very interesting experience. I joined the board of IC2 in 2012 on what was a petition ticket. So I wasn't part of the official slate. I ran a petition, and a lot of people in the information security community supported me. So I came in a little bit as a rogue element, but it was pretty clear at that point that the people on the board were experienced people with their heart in the right place, and we managed to work together to what I feel was a better place for IC Squared, to the point where I was chosen to be, or yeah, let's say I was chosen to be the chair of the IC Square board 2 years later. And I'm not a real fan of touting my own horn. I rather have my work speak for me. But going from coming in as a rogue element to having the same people that you were that rogue element to, electing you as a chair of their board 2 years later, I feel that was a nice evolution. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, that must have felt good, all right. Being recognized by your peers, it's always a good thing. So when you were at ISC Squared, did you have a particular focus over specific certifications, or what did your role involve?
So being a member of the IC Squared board is being part of the oversight and the strategic vision behind IC Squared. A lot of people see the board of IC Squared as the day-to-day management of IC Squared, which is not the case. There are more than 100 people employed by IC Squared, working in both the US, UK, Hong Kong, China, all over the world, that do the day-to-day management. The board, first and foremost, has that oversight and governance responsibility. So they have to look at the number. They have to see that IC Squared, being a 501c3 organization, or excuse me, 501c6 organization, they are aligned with that mission. And then also look at the longer term strategy to protect the profession. I mean, and see where the profession is going to in the longer term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And with your time there, how did you see it evolve much in relation to tying in with moving trends in the market, or adding in different modules into the courses to ensure that if someone had an accreditation from ISC Squared, it was current?
Yes, so that's a super interesting question and can be a very, very long answer. One of the things that very few people don't seem to understand is that a professional certification needs to meet a certain standard. There's actually a certification for certification, or an accreditation for certifications, which is ANSI 17024. Which says it basically works in the US for all types of professions. So whether you're a nurse or a security professional, ANSI 17024 defines how a certification needs to be managed. And that means that every few years, there needs to be what they call a joint task analysis, which basically is a group of people, professionals in the field, coming together and describing what the different tasks are that a security professional, in our case, executes. And we all know that information security is a very broad profession, right? You can be an auditor, you can be a Vciso, you can be a malware analyst, you can be a reverse engineer. There's a lot of different tasks that a security professional needs to execute, right? Yeah. Just like a general nurse has a certain set of skill sets, but then there are also specific skill sets for a nurse that works in the neonatal ward, or a nurse that works in emergency care, or a nurse that works in the operating room. They have fringe skill sets that don't necessarily overlap, but there is a core skill set that applies to everybody. Yeah. So defining that is a core element of a good certification, and keeping that current is very important as well, which happens through what I mentioned, the joint task analysis. An additional part is continued education, the CPs as they call it for IC Squared, or the IC Squared certifications. And that's part of what you mentioned with keeping it current. It is very important for professional certification that someone certified in 2000 is equivalent to, so not the same, but equivalent to someone that is certified in 2020. So you cannot make major changes to the content of the CBK. You cannot make drastic changes to the exam forms and how the exams are taken. You can make those changes, but you need to keep an eye on protecting that equivalency, which, for instance, explains when a lot of people say that in the IC squared content, there's still a lot of talk about MD5 for password hashing or hashing in general. And that is outdated, and MD5 is vulnerable. But in the end, if I teach somebody about hashing algorithms, it doesn't matter if I explain them MD5 or SHA-3. I teach them about hashing, and whatever the example is, it's not a recommendation that they should use MD5. MD5 is a tool to make them understand hashing. And as long as all professionals certified between 2000 and 2020 understand what hashing is, that's a core principle.
So yeah, no, that does make sense. Yeah, you have to make it kind of long lasting. I know I've been working with a lot of people that have accreditations over years and years and years, and it's still they're still highly relevant. The CISSP is such a strong tool for any security professional to have in their armory. So yeah, like obviously your experience has just been so varied. I think how we initially got chatting, we got introduced by a fellow connection, is around the concept and the idea of the virtual CISO, which is it really interests me. You were recommended to me by someone that that really vouched for your experience and kind of classed you as an SME in that space. If you could you just explain what a virtual CISO is, just for members of our audience that aren't aware?
So for me, that virtual CISO role is a service you provide to organizations that do not have the maturity or do not have the budget to foresee a full-time CISO role. They are just not ready to dedicate somebody full-time to that role. They know that information security is an important part of the business that they do, but they need someone that has the experience to establish and kickstart a security program. And I think when we talked earlier, we talked about the different types of experience, both technical and non-technical. I think that comes together in that role, because you're a consultant to both the C-level audience within that company, as well as a guide for the technical piece.
Yeah, you have to kind of balance both sides and be able to communicate effectively in both ways, I imagine.
Yeah.
And so, like, what's the benefit of having a virtual CISO as opposed to going out to market and having someone in full time? Like, are virtual CISOs expected to be on site or expected to do 5 days per week, or how does that kind of work?
It depends on the organization. What I think is most important is that there needs to be a realization within the leadership at the company that they need that they need security leadership. That's I think the number one requirement. So
how long actually? Yeah, what made you get into becoming a virtual CISO? Is that something that you've known of for years, or how did you kind of fall into that part of? How did your career evolve to that point?
Yes, so as I mentioned previously, I never made a choice between staying technical or going into management. I always liked both sides, and then just like I feel everything in my career was rather by accident. I did a security assessment for a client. It turned out they had no internal security leadership, and they really didn't know how to kickstart a security program. So they asked me to do that for them. I rolled into that, and that's how I got my first virtual CISO gig. One
Oh,
thing
okay.
that I think is important is, for me, it's the core thing about being a virtual CISO is that you will be replaced within 3 to 5 years, because your task is to make the company mature to such a level that a full-time CISO is needed. So you always have to be ready to hand over. I see a lot of virtual CISOs that I wouldn't say intentionally, but it basically becomes a check the box service, because the customer needs it, but there is no evolution in how it's delivered, to the point where they become redundant. And making myself redundant is the core thing in basically everything I do.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, what good looks like for you is that if you work yourself out of a job, so you have everything,
Yes.
all the processes and the standards in place for someone to come in and take over and do the long
Yeah.
term running of a business.
Yes.
Interesting.
As far as I'm concerned, if it's business as usual, I'm not that interested. So as long as it's exciting and I'm building something new, and we have challenges all the time, I, I love doing the work. If it's just repetitive and without a core purpose, then I probably get tired of it really fast. So I try to not end up in the repetitive part of the job. I know it's necessary and there's always going to be that part, but I still need the challenges and the unknowns.
Yeah, I definitely think in that line of work it will certainly keep you interested. Is there any particular trends you've noticed in the last few years um, that are repeating themselves in the different types of customers you go to work with, in terms of the challenges that keep popping up?
One thing I've noticed, and I think that's a little bit of an addressed market, is that there are indeed people that are made responsible for cybersecurity in their organization, but they don't have the depth of experience to cover both the technical and management side. In some cases, it's a previous auditor that becomes responsible for the compliance part. In some cases, it's a network engineer that has an interest in security that becomes the security director, or even gets the CISO title. What I think is often ignored is that the only thing that's really available to them is very expensive consulting services from things like Gartner and Forrester, where they get pre-shoot information, and you know how it goes. Nobody's ever fired for buying Cisco, right? And I think there's a real value in having experts available that can support those roles. Not necessarily taking the ownership of security, but being a soundboard for those lesser experienced security leaders in our industry.
I guess, yeah. So for you, in terms of your career, you've spanned quite a lot of areas. You've covered nearly every pocket within cybersecurity and business risk. I guess what's left for you to really go after at this stage? What's really piquing your interest, and what are some new sort of career goals you're working towards?
The way I've defined it for wire security is that we want to address wicked problems, and wicked problems are those problems that we haven't solved before, right? There are challenges that organizations see that they don't know how to address. And my goal with wire security is that we come in, compartmentalize the issues that we are looking at, and build towards solutions, even if we don't know what the outcome will be. It's very, very easy to define projects and come up with deliverables that are repetitive, and we come back to that story. If there are issues that are not solved yet, that's what I will go after. So I cannot clearly say this is what I will do in the next 5 years, but I know within the next 5 years or next 10 years, I will find 3 or 4 problems that we will happily hammer on for several months.
Brilliant. yeah, so basically just staying adaptable, and yes, that makes perfect sense. But look, Wim Remes, I really appreciate your time and the work you're doing with Wire Security. You guys sound like a really a top outfit. So best of luck with everything. And look, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your insights on the Vciso and telling us a bit about your story. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.